So there's a story where Batman is committed to Arkham Asylum, and it takes place in DC's New 52 Detective Comics. That was when DC rebooted the Batman comics. This is called Gothopia, and it basically opens up with Poison Ivy running through the city of Gotham, screaming about how the world around them is all being destroyed and everything is a lie. Now, you also get this really cool monologue from Batman that actually takes place over the course of the entire comic. But Poison Ivy's motivations here are actually a lot more interesting than you think, because what she does is she starts ensnaring everybody, literally using vines and all that kind of stuff. But Batman says, as long as I've known her, Pamela Isley has been on a crusade to change the world. And as long as I've known her, she's been going about it the wrong way. Today, she appeared in Gotham in an agitated state, clearly delusional. Now, it looks that way, right? I mean, a villain just shows up in the city screaming about how everything is a lie, nothing that everybody's seeing is real, and just starts attacking everyone. It sounds like the ravings of a schizophrenic, right? A person who is unable to differentiate between reality and fantasy. Now, of course, we know that Poison Ivy is not a schizophrenic, so the question is, what is going on? And what she says are things like, it shouldn't be this way. This is a city of poison, toxins all around us. And if we don't act to stop it, soon, all that will be left is a city of fear and death. Wake up, Gotham, wake up. And that's when Batman emerges. Now, the way that Batman looks here is amazing, because instead of the traditional dark and broody Batman costume, you get this costume where he's all in white or kind of silver, maybe titanium, but it looks cool. I don't remember in Arkham Asylum if this was a costume that he had, but I really hope it was. But Batman shows up here and kind of does what you would expect. He attacks Poison Ivy and tries to incapacitate her, but even Poison Ivy is kind of taken aback, right? She's like, you too, Batman. I thought you of all people would be able to see the truth. And the response of Batman is, the truth is obvious, Ivy. You're raving. You've attacked my city. And Poison Ivy is, again, kind of flabbergasted. Now, for a person who is presumably operating under some kind of mental illness that has yet to be identified, she's incredibly lucid and convinced that everything she's seeing is a lie. Not only that, she talks to Batman about how she's trying to save the city and goes in to kiss him. But then Catwoman appears and attacks Poison Ivy. Now, the idea of Poison Ivy kissing Batman is going to be incredibly important as we get further into this story. But with Catwoman attacking Poison Ivy, it's enough to basically incapacitate her and then essentially knock her down. And so because of that, you have Catwoman who embraces Batman, and you can tell that it's not even really them operating as partners so much as a romantic couple. Now, this is an important thing because a lot of you guys who read Tom King's Batman run, you're aware of the whole idea that Batman and Catwoman were supposed to get married. This is a long-standing element to Batman's comics, the kind of will they, won't they between him and Catwoman. They're sort of the perfect couple, right? Like the 1-2 punch among couples outside of Superman and Lois Lane. But the other thing here is Catwoman is not called Catwoman. She's called Catbird. And even where Batman tells her it's enough, right, you need to relax, the response of Selina Kyle here, right, Catwoman, is she's a lunatic, Batman, and she wanted to hurt us. So the romantic element that's here is incredibly intriguing because, of course, Poison Ivy is handed off to the Gotham City Police Department, and then Batman says, Gotham, my shining city, is safe once again, and all is right in the world. And so he gives us this following monologue, and you can tell just by the nature of the circumstances here, something isn't right. And Batman says the rest of the morning is spent on patrol, lending a hand to the Gotham City Police Department when a tenement fire breaks out near the East End, assisting the EMTs with the injured after an ice cream truck jackknifed on the interstate and plowed into a school bus, after which the children were bought ice creams that looked like Donald Duck with the gumball eyes. Those of you guys who are millennials, you know what I'm talking about, right? But he says, and still making it to City Hall in the afternoon with plenty of time to spare. Bluebell and Brightbat joined shortly thereafter, and we put on a good show for the cameras as Mayor Cobblepot gave us our commendations. And so this all points to the idea that something is really wrong here, because number one, None of these characters make any sense. Bluebell, Brightbat, those characters don't exist. Now, of course, these are clearly stand-ins for characters like Batgirl and Batwoman, but the fact is that everything has been shifted up here. Not only that, Batman is not the guy to publicly accept a commendation for his actions. Batman slinks around in the night dealing with criminals and then slinks back away to be Bruce Wayne during the daytime. He doesn't want admiration. He doesn't want awards, grand ceremonies, or anything like that. In a lot of ways, he sees doing what he does as something that needs to be done, not something he chooses to do. But in the midst of all of this, he also tells us Gotham has seen a 90% drop in crime over the last few months. Other than today's incident with Ivy, Gotham is almost crime-free. Almost, because Harvey Bullock approaches Batman and tells him that there's an incident at Cedar and 45th. Batman has to respond, and when he gets there, it's not some kind of a crime taking place in Gotham City. It's a guy standing on the ledge getting ready to jump off. But here's the kicker about all of this, and this is where everything becomes so strange as far as us picking up with the story, and Batman realizing that maybe Poison Ivy was right, because Batman asked the question, what do we know about the jumper? The response of Harvey Bullock, the name is Clayton Parker, recently engaged, recently promoted. And get this guy won $130,000 last week playing the state lottery. You tell me, Batman, does that sound like somebody with nothing to live for? And so when Batman gets up there to where this guy is at, and basically tries to bring him down, he starts screaming about how he doesn't want to deal with nightmares anymore. He's had enough of all of it. And that's what really confuses Batman, because suddenly out of nowhere, where this guy is just kind of taken by one of the cops to a police car and is likely going to receive some kind of psychological evaluation to make sure he's not a danger to himself and others, he grabs the cop's gun, puts one to his dome piece, and that's the end of that. And so you pick up in the Batcave, right, like shortly after this, and Batman, alongside Selina Kyle, is kind of thinking about all of this, right? What we end up learning is that 36 people in the past week have all ended their lives. There's no pattern, no rhyme or reason, people of all ages and from all walks of life. And Batman says, crime around Gotham is at an all-time low. Unemployment is at an all-time low. The economy is robust, but these people keep ending their lives, and the number of people doing it is rising every single day. So something doesn't quite make sense. Now notice this. Instead of confirming his view that something's wrong, Selina Kyle's response is, well, you're just working too hard. You need to take the edge off. You're seeing problems where none exist. But even when Alfred comes down, Alfred says the same thing. He says, I concur with Miss Kyle. Whatever caused those poor souls to take their own lives, they did so of their own volition. They did not receive any sort of chemical encouragement. Now, this also comes off of Alfred running a toxicology check on every single one of these folks who ended their lives, and there is no chemical agent. There's nothing in their bloodstream that would indicate that they were somehow removed from sound mind and did this because someone influenced them into doing it. They're doing it of their own volition. So ultimately, Batman leaves, right? He walks away, and he gets this, again, this monologue where he says, I'd like to come out here sometimes to clear my head. In the gardens of Wayne Manor, I'm angry and I shouldn't be. Selina's right. There's no reason for me to be wound up so tightly, not with things going so well in my life in Gotham City. And maybe there's no reason for me to do this anymore. What's the point anyway? What am I fighting for? And suddenly he feels a prick in the back of his neck and he realizes that it's one of Poison Ivy's thorns. And suddenly he starts to see the reality that he's actually in. That in this great big huge beautiful garden are actually tombstones that weren't there before. Now, of course, those tombstones belong to Thomas and Martha, but still, he starts to get angry, he starts to lash out. He shows back up at Wayne Manor, and basically his knuckles are all bloody. Alfred's like, what in the world is going on here? And ultimately Batman says, I have to get out. He gets in the Batwing, and then he goes down into Gotham City itself, and he says, now I'm starting to remember. This is where I go to clear my head. I go to Gotham. Now, while he's doing this, Alfred returns with another toxicology lab, but this time, it's for Bruce Wayne himself. And while Bruce Wayne ordered the lab to be done based on the chemical composition of the thorn from Poison Ivy, it was a ruse, and he says as much. He says, Alfred's brain is scrambled, or he never would have sent me this information. I was not thinking clearly either, but more and more, I'm starting to. Had Alfred been thinking clearly, he'd remembered we'd analyzed the properties of the poison ivy controlled plants at least a dozen times in the past. Their composition almost never changes. That was never what I was looking for. Instead, the analysis was supposed to be of my blood, which was covering the thorn that I gave to Alfred. Immediately, I recognized the chemical compound for at least 4 distinct neurotransmitters. 1, to relax the body and calm the mind, making it susceptible to hysterical contagion, along with an enhanced psychostimulant to affect input received by the prefrontal cortex, coupled with a highly addictive psychotropic property causing the body and mind to see and feel only what they've been programmed to, and to react violently to any sort of stimulus that contradicts this fabricated reality. Batman has been exposed to a toxin that forces him to see the world differently than he normally sees it. And there's only one person in Batman's villains rogues gallery that does this. And it is the most brazen scheme to date. And it's amazing the way that he does it, right? So what happens here is Selina Kyle arrives on the scene due to the fact that she's almost kind of like an antibody in all of this, which is to say she believes in the reality. Her job is to bring Batman back to it. You guys know what this is about. Do I need to say it? The allegory of Plato's cave. But that's basically what it is, right? Ultimately, Selina Kyle ends up fighting Batman due to the fact that he starts resisting what he's seeing. He starts buying into everything that Poison Ivy was saying, which is all of this is a lie. The result is that Selina Kyle did not come alone. Instead, she brought the entire Bat family with her, who again are all under the influence of Batman. And so what he does, and this is one of the coolest things to his character, he says, fighting them does not get me any closer to finding out who masterminded this or putting a stop to it. And if I allow things to escalate, somebody is going to get seriously injured, right? Someone call an ambulance, but not for me. And he says there's only one answer here: lose the battle and win the war. And so ultimately, he makes it look like they got the better of him. This in turn leads him to being transferred to the Center for Health and Wellness, which is being ran by Dr. Jonathan Crane, also known as the Scarecrow. And what you end up finding out is that yes, Batman is seeing a false reality, because the real reality here is it's not just Scarecrow. It's also Professor Pig, Harley Quinn, Killer Croc, and Victor Freeze. So this is awesome because what it does is it switches over to Batman in one of the cells of Arkham Asylum in a straitjacket. And you basically have these guys who have all gathered together figuring out what they're going to do with Batman. Of course, Professor Pig wants to cut his head open and essentially lobotomize him. Victor Freeze, of course, wants to freeze him and basically enact some kind of gene therapy. But at the end of it all, really Batman is here for Scarecrow's own individual and personal enjoyment. But what they do is they put forward this idea that Batman is actually insane. But Batman is not in some kind of center for wellness. He's in Arkham Asylum. It just looks like a center for wellness for all those people who were under Scarecrow's control. Not only that, Batman says Arkham Asylum, Gotham's sanitarium for the criminally insane. Only today, the lunatics are running the asylum. The only sane people these days are Arkham's inmates. Everyone outside of Arkham, everyone in Gotham, is under the influence of a mass delusion, imagining themselves in some sort of perfect world, when in fact, the opposite was the case. The warning signs were there, but I chose to ignore them, right until it was almost too late. And he says, it really did seem like the perfect world. My life was good, my city was safe, but it was a lie. My mind was clouded, I was deluded, and now I am free. And that's when you really get to see how far this delusion goes, because it's not just Batman and the immediate members of the Bat family, It's everyone in Gotham City. Every single person in Gotham is under the Scarecrow's influence. Now, this is when you also get into like the most Batman moment ever in the history of comics, right? All the people who say like Batman can do anything because he's Batman, this is it. Because Batman says, they took away my utility belt, recognizing accurately its danger, but they left me in my bat suit. Crane has no interest in my alter identity. He's too preoccupied with whatever he's planning, while everybody serving him is too addled by their own delusions to think clearly. But belt or no belt, I've got plenty of tricks up my sleeves. And he says, some months ago, I was invited to test and evaluate the recently upgraded security systems at Arkham Asylum. They added an entirely new array of security devices. They also computerized their entire system, much like my bat suit or the central processor inside my bat cowl. Recognizing the trouble I'd had with Arkham Asylum, and no doubt likely to continue to have, Batman basically programmed a back door for himself. He gave himself a way to essentially access the security systems and shut it down if he needs to. Now, what he says is there's 17 seconds before the backup systems reboot the main surveillance system, which is enough for him to get to the security offices and then take down the villains who were running the office. Now, following that, he ends up coming across a couple of guards here. Because of the fact that they're seemingly just regular people, albeit under the influence of Scarecrow's toxin, they don't really see what's actually going on here. They think that they're just doing their jobs and it's a normal day and so on and so forth. So instead of just like terrorizing these guys, Batman, of course, just knocks them out with a kind of hidden hand, and that's it. Following that, he ends up going to the medical facilities in the B-Wing and ultimately converts it into a kind of lab. And he said it's essentially designed that way, right? Scarecrow's current base of operations. And he says, and this is where I want to learn how Scarecrow did what he did. This new toxin, chemically, it's not terribly different from the Scarecrow fear toxin, which, as we know, affects the receptors of the brain. And he says it's the effects that vary so dramatically. Unlike the normal fear toxin, which basically forces a person to experience nothing but their absolute worst fears, which over the course of the story, we're actually going to get a play-by-play of how the fear toxins traditionally work. But focusing on this, it's not designed to force a person to experience their worst fears. It's designed to produce maximum contentment, to basically make people as happy as humanly possible. And he says, I'll need at least 3 more nights in the lab to create a working antidote, but I don't have that much time. There is, however, one person that I can go to that would be able to ensure that I can whip up this antidote faster than 3 days. He goes to Poison Ivy. Because almost every single toxin out there is derived in some capacity from plant matter, and because of the nature of her body structure, Poison Ivy is immune to pretty much every toxin in existence. It's why she was walking around the city of Gotham screaming about how nothing was real, because she was the only person that was not affected by what she was seeing. For her, it really was not real. Everybody in the city was operating under some kind of mass delusion. And so when Batman shows up, of course, she punches him. She's like, I tried to tell you what was going on, man, but you really didn't want to listen. So that punch is what you get for refusing to believe that I was telling you the truth. And now you get a kiss for your chivalry, which is really what Batman needed. And it's not just Poison Ivy kissing Batman for the sake of kissing him, although I imagine Batman doesn't mind it too much. This was done because kissing Batman grants him a temporary immunity to the toxins that are flowing through his system. And so what ends up happening is the two of them start working together to start developing an antidote. But this is when you get to what's really going on here and the whole dark and nefarious part of this, if you could imagine it even getting any worse. What we end up learning here is Scarecrow does not stay in Arkham Asylum at night. Instead, what he does is he goes into Gotham and starts conducting fear experiments on people. And where Batman asks, like, what in the world are you talking about? The response of Poison Ivy here is, think about it, Batman. Take away a person's average daily petty fears and then subject them to the most intense abject fear imaginable. How much more potent would the fear toxin in their system be if you could extract it? Which is true. right? I mean, if you remove any real fear from people's lives, then any kind of fear they would experience as a result of the fear toxin wouldn't be the most basic thing imaginable. Oh my God, I got laid off from my job. Instead, all those worries are gone. Those fears don't exist. The only fears that are left to be drawn to the surface are the exceedingly deep, dark fears, right? The very, very deep ones that sit in our subconscious. Things that are rational, irrational, the whole 9 yards. The response of Batman, the people he does this to, they do not remember, do they? But they're damaged. Even on some level, they don't know or understand, which is why Gotham is having a rash of suicides, while still more and more people are cracking and ending up here. That guy that wanted to jump off the building earlier in the story, he didn't understand exactly what was happening, but what he did understand is the nightmares he was experiencing were real. And in the absence of having anything worth fearing in his life, the fears he did experience were beyond his ability to handle, so much so that seemingly jumping off a building was the only way to escape. And so what Batman does by way of him having this kind of antidote, or at least temporary immunity, particularly because of poison ivy, is it allows him to make his way through Arkham Asylum with the intention of catching up to Scarecrow and then finding out what it is that he's actually trying to achieve here. Now, of course, he does run into a little bit of resistance from Killer Croc. Killer Croc himself isn't particularly influenced by the Scarecrow's fear toxin, but a lot of it's because his brain is so small that it just takes an incredibly long time for the toxin to work its way into his brain. But at the end of the day, I mean, Killer Croc just kind of usually goes with whoever it is that's willing to pay him the most money. The important thing here is that ultimately Batman catches up to Scarecrow only to be met by all the other members of the Batfamily under Scarecrow's control. And so a fight, of course, breaks out between all these guys. Batman basically fighting a combination of his own guys, as well as the forces of Scarecrow. Of course, Poison Ivy's joining him with this as well. But then Scarecrow, of course, uses leverage, the smartest maneuver. He snatches up Selina Kyle and then puts a scythe to her throat and is like, if you do not cooperate, she dies. And of course, Batman's not going to stand there and just let her get killed. And so when the question's asked, what is cooperate? Scarecrow says, all you have to do is breathe. And he sprays Batman with a fear toxin. Now, here's the play-by-play, right? This is when Batman breaks down what it's like to be exposed to the Scarecrow's fear toxin. He says, the effect of the fear gas is immediate, though initially less intense when absorbed through the skin instead of the lungs. First contact with the epidermis causes a burning sensation, though it varies from victim to victim, whether it's a sensation of burning heat or cold. A tingling to the nerve receptors in the epidermis soon follows, the result of rapid synaptic and neural misfires. Survivors most often describe initial effects as a sensation similar to being covered by bugs, snakes, or maggots. The toxin then works its way deeper into the subconscious, where it stimulates the amygdala and the dorsal hippocampus to trigger various specific fear memories. Sometimes it brings forth the psyche's most deep-seated fears and phobias and intensifies them. Other times it manifests as a hallucination of a specific moment of intense trauma or stress stretched to an indeterminable length. Typically, the acute strain on the mental state of the afflicted results in a severe physical response, sometimes conniptions, catatonia, even a heart attack. And so ultimately, Batman's made to stand up by Scarecrow, now completely under the influence of his fear toxin, or at least the toxin that demands that Batman follow the instructions of Scarecrow. Here's the cool thing. What Batman says is the one person immune to the effects of Scarecrow's various toxins is Poison Ivy. She agreed to help me. Together in a makeshift lab, we developed an antidote. The idea was to release this antidote into Gotham and then reverse its effects. The problem is that plans do not always work out as planned, and that leads to Batman attacking Poison Ivy and then incapacitating her. And so following this, Batman is sent out into Arkham Asylum by the Scarecrow alongside Professor Pig and Merrymaker. Now, Merrymaker is a very, very obscure villain in the Batman mythos. Truth to tell, he didn't appear until this time in Detective Comics is when he was introduced. Honestly, I don't think he's had any significant appearances in DC Comics since his introduction in this story. I think he's appeared in about 15 different issues. I may be off by one or two, but he's just like a small-time guy. And in fact, you'll probably never see him again after this story. Here's the crazy thing, and I know it's not supposed to be funny, but it is funny because Batman has to partake in going into Gotham and spraying people with this fear toxin. What Batman does alongside Professor Pig and Merrymaker is they show up in this dude's apartment. Now put yourself in this guy's shoes. You're living in this place, you're just asleep in the middle of the night, some guys sneak into your apartment without you knowing and then suddenly wake you up out of a dead sleep and then immediately spray gas in your face, only for you to see the most horrifying thing that you could ever imagine in your life. I know it's not supposed to be funny, but it's hilarious to me. I told you guys, I'm a villain, man. Like, I'm a straight up bad guy. Like, I don't love the suffering of others, but stuff like this is hilarious to me, and I don't know why. I'm really screwed up. But once it's all said and done, right, Batman lives up to the expectation of the Scarecrow as a guy under his control. And even then, they say so. Here's the cool thing. Batman says, I understand now, I understand everything. Exposure to fear gas while under the prolonged effects of contentment toxin produces a specific change in the brain chemistry, fundamentally alters how it functions, that this produces a powerful fuel for further toxins. This was Scarecrow's plan all along, to basically gas the entirety of the eastern seaboard using this toxin. Now, here's the cool thing. Batman is not actually under the control of Scarecrow. And he says as much, right? He says, Crane is counting down to detonation. I'm doing a count of my own. 12 people exposed to fear toxin by my hand. 12 career criminals, recidivist lowlives I've been unable to keep behind bars, who are going to come away with this with a lifetime of permanent nightmares. Basically, Batman targeted these guys intentionally, which is a pretty hardcore thing to do, right? Nightmares about facing me if they ever decide to break the law again. And I'm thinking about the counteragent I slipped to Merrymaker along with his extractions, which he passed along to Scarecrow to mix in with the others, calculating how long it will take to mix into and break down Scarecrow's toxin and reverse its impact, which happens immediately. And Batman says as much, right? This happened right off the bat, that because of the fact that this kind of counteragent is now spread throughout the city of Gotham, people start returning to their normal selves. Scarecrow, of course, is just like, what in the world is going on? But Batman and the Batfamily recoup long enough to defeat all the villains, which includes Scarecrow, and Scarecrow is basically taken back to Arkham Asylum. Here's the kicker. Before they get him away, the guy explodes out of the truck and is like, did you really think I could be stopped, Batman? That fear could be contained? You've never understood the power of terror, Batman, not like I do. Fear will control you. Fear will consume you. And in the end, fear will destroy you. And Scarecrow kills Batman on the spot. And he just says, Gotham, you are mine again. Your dream of a hero's rescue is over, replaced by a nightmare. Only for us to find out none of that actually happened, right? I mean, everything up to the point where Scarecrow was defeated actually happened, but he never killed Batman. Everything he's seeing about killing Batman, taking over the city of Gotham, he's sitting in a cell, right? He's sitting in a padded room, being forced to endure the exact same thing that he did to Batman. The toxin is of such a degree that he is basically seeing whatever it is that he wants to see. It's his contentment, defeating Batman and conquering Gotham. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. I told you, this was a great story. Let me know if there are any other Batman stories you want me to cover. We'll probably do Nightfall next, and I will catch you all later. Peace.